What would it be like to walk into a room and not immediately wonder who you need to be? What would it feel like to stop scanning other people's faces for approval? What would it feel like to stop rehearsing every conversation that you have, to stop deciding which parts of yourself you can show and which parts of yourself do you need to hide? So many of us say that we want to be authentic, we want to be real, and we want to feel free. But being real and authentic requires something from us that we may not often be willing to do. Let's face it. It requires the willingness to risk being seen by others and to be vulnerable. And what does it mean to be seen? Being seen by others means that someone might judge us. They might reject us. They might misunderstand what we're saying. They might disagree with us. And they might even abandon us. And that is why we wear masks in the first place. It's not because we are fake or phony. It's because at some point in our lives, being fully ourselves did not feel safe.
Hey, and welcome to Masks Off Inner Freedom for People Pleasers and Perfectionists. This is a podcast for those who are tired of holding it all together. I'm Kim Gross, your host, and if you've ever felt like you're doing all the right things, but still feel anxious, disconnected, or quietly burned out, you're in the right place. Here we talk about the patterns you don't even realize you're living inside of: self-abandonment, over-functioning, chasing approval, and mistaking productivity for your worth, and more. This isn't about fixing yourself. It's about remembering who you were before you learned to perform, perfect, and please to belong. Each week, we'll slow things down. We'll unpack the nervous system, the inner critic, and the subtle ways that you learned to disconnect from your true self so you can stop living from pressure and start living from presence. This is your space to take the masks off. So let's begin.
Throughout the month of July, I have been exploring the many ways that fear of judgment can condition us or can shape us. At my high school reunion, my 40th high school reunion, the fear of judgment awakened this desire in me to perform and present a polished version of myself. The next episode was on comparison and how comparison either causes us to feel like we are above, so therefore superior, or below others, inferior. And I shared my infamous story of being in middle school where I had this unspoken competition with two of my really good friends. And it was all about who had more Anye, which is a brand. It was a designer brand name for purses and clothing, etc. In that example, in that episode, when I shared that when I had more than my friends, I felt superior. And if they ended up getting more, then I felt inferior, which is crazy that we can base our worth and how we feel about ourselves off of how much designer clothes we have. And then after that, I talked about how judgment can become a way of protecting ourselves from feeling vulnerable feelings. And back in the day, it was so much easier to judge my friends rather than allowing myself to be vulnerable and to share what I truly needed or what I truly felt about them or about a situation. For example, there was a friend that I had who, when we would go out for lunch, tell the waiter that either the music was too loud and can we move to a different table, or the air conditioning was too cold and could we move, or whatever the case was on that particular day. And, at the end of the day, the reason that I went into judgment is either one of two things. One, I didn't want to speak up and say the truth, which is maybe I was feeling embarrassed in that situation because she was being quote unquote too much or too much of a pain in the ass. And more than likely what was also at play is that it was very difficult for me in those days. And if I'm 1,000% honest with you, sometimes I do still struggle to speak up for what I want and need. I struggle to assert myself, especially in situations like that in a restaurant or in public. Although I have gotten much better, I will now say if my salmon is undercooked, rather than eating an undercooked salmon, I will ask them to take it back and cook it well done. And I will now speak up and tell a waitress that I'm gluten free, even though my family continues to make fun of me for being high maintenance, quote unquote, and for being too much, right? And that's the story. That's the story that we so often have tell ourselves or have heard, is that we are too much. So we can go to this place of judging rather than being vulnerable. And then finally, last week's episode was about control and about feeling powerless. And that control appears when either life or the people in our lives do not behave according to our plan. We may think that we are waving the magic wand and making life be all rainbows, sunshines, and unicorns, but then when it's not, because life often doesn't flow in the way that we want. And for example, I remember a little over a year ago that when my daughter was making a decision to go to California for her internship, and at the time, I was in fear, so much fear, worry, and concern about her moving. My fear was that she wasn't going to be able to have enough money to pay all of her bills, and then she would somehow end up on the streets, homeless. Or what was also underneath, and probably more of the issue, was that my husband and I were going to have to make a decision. Were we willing to support her living expenses while she was out there, or were we going to make her have to pack up and maybe delay her education by a semester? And honestly, like, if I'm going to call myself out and take off my mask, I will say that we chose to support her while she was out there because it would be way too unbearable for me to feel the discomfort of setting such a strong boundary and saying, well, if you can't afford to stay there on your own, then you're going to have to come home. That would have been way too difficult for my nervous system to handle that, because I would have felt responsible for her education being delayed or her being super disappointed, upset with us. And that was only a year and a half ago. And I say that in that way to say that this is about progress. It's not about being perfect. It's not about handling every single situation with grace and perfection. And our patterns are going to still come up, and they do to this day. The key is not to shame ourselves when the patterns come up, but to be gentle, to have compassion and like, ah, okay, there you are again, pattern. I see you. At the end of the day, what I'm really trying to point out there in that example is how control can take over, or the need to control whenever we're feeling powerless. And that's what I focused on in last week's episode. And underneath all of these patterns, and this is the whole point of the month of July so far, is that there's a fear underneath. What happens if I'm not enough as I am? And even a deeper question could be, will I still be loved if I'm being fully myself? What does it mean then to be real and unfiltered? Because that's what I'm focusing on this week as I round out the month of July. Being real and unfiltered does not mean, and I'm going to start with what it does not mean. It does not mean that you suddenly share every personal and intimate detail about yourself and your life with everyone, or even like people that you just meet. Brene Brown has often said that people have to earn the trust for you to be vulnerable with them. So this isn't about spilling your thoughts, your feelings, your beliefs all over the place and not having any discernment at all. It's also not about saying whatever comes to your mind and not considering the impact that it may have on other people. It's not about having zero filter. Being real and unfiltered also is not about refusing to accept responsibility by saying, well, that's just who I am. That's just who I am. I've always been that way. And so, therefore, what? That's a hall pass that you can act and behave in any way. This is not what it means to be real and unfiltered. Being real with the masks off and being unfiltered means that you acknowledge what you genuinely feel. You can have genuine, honest conversations in a kind and compassionate way. And I do this with my kids all the time. It also means knowing what you want, what you need, what you feel, and what you believe. It also is about speaking honestly when it matters. So you're using discernment. It's letting other people know that you're imperfect, that you can be messy, you can be vulnerable, and you know that it's okay. And you are also refusing to betray yourself merely to maintain the approval of someone else. So being unfiltered does not mean that you don't have any boundaries at all. It means that your boundaries are no longer being used to hide who you really are. There are a few masks that we do wear in order to avoid rejection and that we use to avoid the judgment of others. And you may even notice as I describe these different masks that you wear. First, there is the agreeable mask. I'm fine with whatever you want. That's the agreeable mask. I'm fine with whatever you want. And the reason that this is a mask is because if you are this person, you're avoiding conflict because feeling accepted feels so much better than being honest and truthful. The perfection mask, we've talked about that one ad nauseum on this show. And again, the perfection mask says if I do everything right, then no one will have a reason to reject me. And so you carefully manage your image, your performance, your appearance, your parenting, your relationships, your body, the way you work out, the way that you eat. The strong mask, the strong one says, I don't need anyone and nothing bothers me. I can handle everything. In reality, though, if you're wearing the strong mask, most likely you are hiding when you're hurt. You're hiding your needs. You're hiding that you feel lonely. You're hiding fear and you're hiding your disappointment. So that's a tough one to wear. And so far, I can say check, check, check. I wear all of these masks or have worn them in the past. Here's another one that I wear, the easygoing mask, where you are super agreeable. You will say, oh, it's no big deal if someone cancels on you, if someone says something offensive, or they don't show up, they don't do what they say. You're like, oh, no big deal. And in this instance, you are minimizing that you feel hurt. And you are doing that because you don't want to seem as being difficult or demanding or, quote, too much or even high maintenance. Then there's the caretaker mask, yet another one that I have worn, where this one says, let me focus on everyone else's needs and not my own. And if you wear this mask, you are the person who becomes indispensable so that you don't have to risk simply being loved for who you are. And then lastly, there is the I'm so polished mask. And this mask is for the person who says, let me present the version of myself that will be most acceptable to others. And you can wear this mask when you're in social settings, professionally, if you're online, or if you're with your families, and even in romantic relationships. What I want to say is that every mask is an attempt to protect us from a feeling that we once believed we could not tolerate. And it says, do not let them see your insecurity. When you're wearing the masks, this is what you're saying. Do not let anyone see that I'm insecure. Do not disappoint anyone. Do not be too emotional. Don't ask for too much. Do not admit that you're struggling. And do not let them know what you truly think, what you feel, and what you believe. And do not risk being left behind. So, I'm going to share a story of, or an example of when I have felt so real and unfiltered. I was invited to be on a podcast a few years ago. The podcast host had three of us on, myself, a female lawyer, and a woman who was in corporate. She was just asking us all kinds of questions, and the other two were going first, and they were giving very well thought out, intellectual, educated responses. And then as I tried to match the energy that they were at or the level that they were at, I could feel my entire body tense and tighten. And I knew I was wearing my performative mask and I was all in my head. My palms were sweating. My heart was racing. My entire body was just so tight, like I said. And then it just came to me to just take a deep breath. And I said to myself, if I'm going to walk the walk and I'm going to practice what I preach, I need to take off my freaking mask right now, right here, because I'm in this perfectionistic, performing, pleasing energy, and it's not how I want to be. So I said to the host, I said, I don't know if we're allowed to swear on your podcast. And she said, yes, yeah, we go for it. I swear, we swear on this podcast. So I said, okay, I took one more deep breath. And then I said to the three of them, I said, I feel like such a fucking imposter. And I did. I felt like such an imposter because I was trying to look polished. I was trying to perform and I didn't want to feel insecure that didn't know as much as the other two women or that I couldn't answer the questions appropriately, or even who was I to be invited on this podcast and sit alongside these very two distinguished women. And so when I said that, and I allowed myself to be very honest and vulnerable, you could see the other two women, the lawyer and the corporate woman, you could see their expressions shift. You could see their bodies just soften as if they were like, as if I just gave them permission to take off their masks and be their true selves. And then we had this great conversation because they followed up by saying, oh my God, we were feeling the same way about you. What? You're feeling that way about me? Here I am. I'm a stay at home mom. I'm just a stay at home mom. I haven't worked outside of my home in 20 some years. And I'm just a podcast host. I wasn't even an author at that point, so I couldn't even use that as a way to puff myself up. And then I was able to sink into my true self. Of course, I should be here. Of course, I belong with these two women because we are all humans at the end of the day. We are all human beings. We're all messy humans. And no one in the world is better than or less than. There may be people who have more skills that they might be more skilled in an area than I am. Certainly, I couldn't be a lawyer. I'm not trained to be a lawyer. I'm not trained to be a corporate woman. So they might be more skilled in that way, but they are not better than me or more than me. And the whole entire episode was on the imposter syndrome, by the way. That's why she invited us on, was to talk about being an imposter. So it worked out perfectly that I showed up as a guest feeling like an imposter and was able to use that example. Being real, though, however, does not guarantee that everyone is going to respond the way that we want. And yet, every time we tell ourselves the truth, we strengthen our relationship with ourselves. So, just like in that story, the moment that I just said, Kim, it's okay, just be you, I strengthened my relationship with myself. Why can it feel so dangerous to be our true selves? Like, honestly, we come into this world as our true selves, as our whole true selves. And then as life goes on and we become conditioned, it feels so dangerous and so scary. The reason why is many of us learned very early on that in order to belong came with certain conditions. We couldn't be our true selves. We might have been praised as a child for being super helpful. Oh my God, you're mommy's little helper. You're so great. Or we might have been praised for being quiet or being successful, responsible, maybe attractive, accommodating. We might have learned whether it was actually said to us or it was implied, and we just picked up the cues that it was not okay and it was discouraged for us to actually show up angry, to be sad, to be needy. Can you imagine you're 6, you're 7, you're 8, and you're not allowed to have needs? And many of us were taught that our needs were not important. Then we began to associate that there were certain parts of ourselves that would equal connection, and there were other parts of ourselves that if we showed up with those parts, it meant rejection, disconnection, or abandonment. And our inner controllers are taking notes of all of this. Now, for me, I didn't even hear the words directly or overtly. It was something that I inferred from the way that everyone in my family behaved and acted, that it was not okay for me to say certain things. It was not okay to make myself be difficult or that I was being too much. And it was more important that I just keep everyone happy, happy, happy. And I had to let go of the true version of myself in order to remain connected. Eventually, the mask becomes so familiar that we may no longer know where the performance ends and our true self begins. That's what's so crazy about this. We just repeat the patterns over and over and over again that it feels like it's who we are. But we are just living out patterns and we're not living our lives. We're not living as our true selves. And honestly, research shows that people who were interviewed on their deathbed, the thing that they regretted the most was not being their true selves. Imagine that. When they look back on their lives, what they regretted the most was not being their true selves. When we show up performing all the time and we're wearing our masks and we're playing out these patterns, there is a hidden cost. When another person ends up liking the masked version of us, it doesn't create genuine inner safety. It doesn't. Because instead, we begin to wonder, would they still love me if they knew the truth? Would they stay if I expressed myself and expressed my needs, if I spoke up? Would they be okay with that? Would they accept me if I disagreed with them or I argued with them? Or what if I wasn't accommodating them all the time and I started to really put my needs first? Would they stay? And what if I stopped being useful? So this creates a very painful paradox. We may technically be in a relationship with someone else, but feel profoundly alone. Because connection without authenticity is not true intimacy. And that, my friends, is something to really pay attention to and ask yourself if you're being authentic in your relationships. You cannot feel deeply known while continually hiding the parts of yourself that most need to be seen and be met. So, in the month of August, my intention is to talk about why do we lose ourselves in relationships? Why do we lose ourselves? Prior to being in a relationship, we could be independent and we're taking care of ourselves, we're showing up as our authentic selves. And then the moment we're in a relationship, it's like, oh my God, where did that person of Kim go? She's gone. Here are some ways of identifying whether or not you lose yourself in a relationship. So, for one, the other person's mood becomes more important than your own inner experience. Their preferences start to override yours in terms of what you do on the weekends, what restaurants you go to, what movies, what TV shows. You may start just doing everything that they want to do and completely lose yourself. You may also start to feel like you have to take responsibility for their emotions. So you become an emotional caretaker. You're trying to make them feel better. You're trying to be their therapist. And when they're angry, you're trying to calm them down. Their emotional well being impacts your emotional well being. You may stop expressing your needs in order to avoid conflict with that person. You might shapeshift yourself to be the way they want you to be. You might confuse being compliant with love, and that's not love at all. You might even abandon your other friendships, you abandon your values, your interests, your dreams in order to stay close and stay connected to this person. And I also want to just make it super clear that this doesn't only happen in romantic relationships. It can also happen with our parents. It can happen with our young adult children, with our partners, with friends, co-workers, siblings, in different community settings. It can happen. It can happen even online and in social media communities. It can happen. At the heart of losing oneself is often this belief that if I remain fully myself, I may lose the relationship. And so, to avoid losing the relationship or the approval, we slowly, little by little, leave ourselves. And sometimes we're not even aware of it. You may not even know that you're doing this. Gabor Mate describes this as trauma. He says, anytime that we abandon our authentic self in order to stay attached to another person, it's trauma. I want to talk about my 5 step power pathway for a moment. It's POWER. P is for recognizing your patterns, O for ownership, W is the willingness to feel in order to heal. E is embracing all the parts of yourself, especially your younger, wounded parts of yourself. And then R is taking radical responsibility and doing something different. In the month of August, I'm going to focus and emphasize W, the 3rd step, which is the willingness to feel in order to heal. Why am I focusing on the 3rd step? Because we do not abandon ourselves randomly. We don't just randomly self abandon. We abandon ourselves in order to avoid feelings. And the feelings that we may be trying to avoid could include rejection, sadness, disappointment, powerlessness, conflict, disapproval, and uncertainty. The mask is not simply hiding our personality, it's protecting us from emotional pain, right? Our brains want us to move away from pain and toward pleasure. That's why we have addictive behaviors. That's why we can be compulsive, because we're always trying to avoid or move away from pain. So the antidote is not to just force yourself or make yourself be authentic. The deeper work is, can I become willing to feel what might happen if I stop performing? Can I tolerate someone being disappointed with me? Can I survive not being understood by another? Can I allow someone to disagree with me? Oh my God, that one hurts. Can I grieve a relationship that required me to disappear in the first place? And can I stay present with the fear that comes up when I say what is true for me? We do not become authentic by eliminating our fear of rejection. That's never going to happen. We cannot just eliminate rejection. People will reject us or be disappointed in us. They may abandon us. They might not like what we have to say. That is a part of life. So we cannot eliminate it, but we can become authentic by learning that we can feel the rejection without losing ourselves. So many times on this podcast, I talk about prison to paradise. And the prison is prison of the mind, not an actual prison. And it's when our inner controller is driving the bus and we are monitoring ourselves constantly, shaping ourselves around others, attempting to prevent the judgment, all the things that I've been talking about on this show for the last month. And quite honestly, it's what I talk about all the time. And so that's the prison that we're in. And we want to move from being in that prison to paradise.
Before we keep going, I want to take a moment to share something really close to my heart. If you're listening to this podcast and you're thinking, wow, this feels familiar, the people pleasing, the perfectionism, the constant self pressure, I wrote a book just for you. It's called Free to Be, A Pathway to Inner Liberation, and it's part memoir, part healing guide. I share my own journey of learning how to stop living in victimhood, take off the masks, and come home to myself, but not by fixing myself, by understanding my patterns with compassion. This isn't a book full of fluff or quick fixes. It's honest, it's grounding, and it's for anyone who's ready to live with more peace and freedom. You can find Free to Be on Amazon. And if the book resonates with you, I would be so grateful if you would take a moment to leave a review. Even a few words can really help others to find it.
But first of all, you have to understand that having paradise is not, this is what it's not. It's not having everyone approve of you. It's not being in a place where you will never feel insecure again, where you're never going to be criticized, where you never lose a relationship, where you're never rejected by someone, where you don't have to set a boundary, or where you're going to be completely unafraid. That is not what paradise is. That's not what I'm talking about. What paradise is, it's knowing what you feel. It's the freedom to know what you feel. It's the freedom to trust yourself enough to acknowledge your pain, to acknowledge what you feel. And then you can express it with care and with honesty. Paradise is allowing people to have their own reactions without you being shaken to the core. You can still remain centered. Paradise is choosing relationships where your real self has room to exist, to be, and you don't have to hide yourself. Paradise is the ability to be fully alive inside your own life. Where might you be editing yourself? Where might you be shape shifting? Where might you be wearing a mask? So think of one of your relationships in which you do not feel fully free to be yourself. And ask yourself, what do you genuinely feel in this relationship? What are you afraid would happen if you actually express that to that person? What part of yourself do you hide the most? What part do you soften or exaggerate or perform? What would it look like to stay with yourself in this relationship, to remain connected to you and not abandon yourself? I would encourage you to not rush into some big dramatic confrontation where you are suddenly going to blow up all your relationships. In fact, I would recommend or encourage that you just take it slow. The first act of being authentic may simply be where you privately are telling yourself the truth. Maybe you just are having a moment of truth and honesty with yourself, and you can say to yourself, I'm actually not okay with the way this relationship is going. Or I do really feel hurt by the things this person says and does. And I do act certain ways because I'm afraid that they'll leave if I say what I truly think and feel. And I am being performative. I am being overly pleasing because I don't want to lose this person. I just met them. And so it's easier to just say what they want to hear and to do what they want me to do. I invite you to practice one small act of authenticity for this week. And maybe that is you just stating your preference on something. Like, I would rather go to a movie than to go to a bar tonight. Maybe you pause before you say yes. When the person asks you or makes a request, instead of immediately saying yes, 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 you can just pause. Is this something I really want to do? You can also admit when someone has hurt you. You can say, ouch, when you said that, that really hurt. Maybe you just have to ask for time to think about something. Give yourself some space to find out, where do you stand? You might be hearing things from all different people and you're getting input from so many different directions, and you're trying to understand, where do I really stand in this? What do I feel? What do I want? And then you could bring in a compassionate message for your inner controller who probably is going haywire all the time. And you can just say to yourself that this part of you that learned to perform is not weak. You're not weak for performing and being this way and wearing the masks. She was actually being wise. You can tell your inner controller that you are actually being wise and that she discovered how to stay connected and how to be praised and how to avoid conflict. She was so smart and so wise and so savvy. At the end of the day, your inner controller may still believe that you are that little child, the wounded child, the scared child who could not survive the rejection, being misunderstood, the conflict, the abandonment. She might still think you're that little child. And you can now, as an adult, say to her, I do understand why you are afraid. I understand why you learned to hide. I understand that you tried to protect me, but I've got you now. We're good. I'm an adult. I will take care of you. Finally, Being real and unfiltered is not some destination that we're going to eventually arrive at. We're going to be on the pinnacle and we're never going to be in a valley again. That's not the case. It's more about cultivating the relationship with ourselves. It is a decision to notice when we have put the mask on and to be curious about what this is trying to protect. And then it's an invitation to go underneath and feel what's underneath. And little by little, we can learn to choose the truth over performance. And you may still want people to like you. You might still be afraid of rejection, and you're going to notice yourself when you're editing or pleasing and you're controlling or hiding. But the freedom begins once you recognize that you're doing that, that you don't have to wait for the fear to go away in order to come home to yourself. You can feel the fear and you can tell the truth. You can feel the discomfort and you can still remain present. Two things can be true at the same time. You can lose someone's approval without losing a connection to yourself. That's the paradise. That's what it means to take off your mask. And that's what it means to be free. I invite you to think about where you can become more real, not reckless and not unboundaried, but more where can you become deeply, deeply honest with yourself? And what would you need to become willing to experience that in order to stop abandoning yourself? So I invite you to think about one relationship again for this upcoming week and notice where or when you automatically edit yourself. And then write it down. What do I feel? What do I feel in this moment? What am I afraid of? What am I hiding? What do I need? And ultimately, how can I stay with myself? And if you know of someone that you can share this episode with who has spent years of becoming who everyone needed them to be, I invite you to pass this episode along. And then finally, as a teaser for the month of August, as I was indicating earlier, we're going to go deeper. We're going to go deeper into what happens when our desire for love and belonging causes us to lose ourselves in relationships. We all do it. We all have done it. And we will explore why we become responsible for other people's feelings, why we silence our own needs, why boundaries can feel like a rejection, and why we might cling to relationships that require us to disappear. Most importantly, we will explore the third step of my 5-step power pathway, which is the willingness to feel in order to heal. Because the way back to yourself is not through controlling how other people respond. You cannot control people, places, and things. It is through learning that you can feel what is difficult and remain deeply connected to who you are.
As we wrap up today's episode, I just want to say thank you for being here and for taking this time for yourself. If this episode resonated with you, I'd really appreciate it if you would subscribe to the podcast or leave a review. Even a quick star rating helps more people find this space and reminds the algorithms that these conversations matter. And I'd love to hear from you. If you have a question, a takeaway, or something that came up while you were listening, leave a comment or send it in. Let's keep the conversation going. This podcast isn't meant to be a one-way street. It's meant to feel like a community. If you want to learn more about me, my work, or the ways we can go deeper together, you can visit my website. All the details are there. Until next time, take a breath, take the mask off, and be gentle with yourself. I'll see you soon.